I took the job because of a stack of papers on my kitchen counter. That's the honest answer. Not because the pay was good, not because I had some background in maritime security, not because the hours worked for me. It was the papers. Specifically, it was the invoice from Jacqueline's PT clinic, the one from Dr. Reyes's office in Torrance, that had a total at the bottom I kept rereading like the number would change if I looked at it enough times. It didn't change. It just sat there being a number I didn't have. Jacqueline's 9. She uses a wheelchair now mostly since the accident. Some days she can do a little with the walker, and those are good days. The driver who hit her didn't stop, didn't even slow down from what the witnesses said. So that was it. No insurance claim to go after, no settlement, nothing. Just us and the bills and a kid who needed specialized physical therapy 3 times a week at a place that didn't take our plan. I'd burned through savings in 4 months. Picked up extra shifts at my regular gig doing security at a warehouse in Carson, but they capped overtime and that was that. I was running out of options in a pretty specific and uncomfortable way. So when I saw the posting for a night security position at Pier J in the port of Long Beach, I applied in about 45 seconds. The pay listed was good. Better than good, actually. The kind of number that makes you read the posting twice to make sure you're not misunderstanding something. I figured there was a catch. There's always a catch with numbers like that. I just figured the catch would be something normal. Long hours, isolated location, maybe some kind of hazmat-adjacent situation where you're technically in a safety zone but close enough to something chemical that nobody wants to work there. Something normal. That was my assumption. I drove out to Pier J on a Tuesday night in January. The port at night is its own thing. Big industrial lights on tall poles making everything orange and flat. The smell of salt and diesel, and something else underneath that I never found a word for. Just the smell of a lot of water nearby. I had my canvas jacket, my work boots, a thermos of coffee I'd made at home, and the kind of tired that lives behind your eyes after months of not sleeping enough. The gate was a heavy chain-link thing with a keypad and a small kiosk off to the side. I pulled up and sat there for a minute. Nobody came out. I checked the time on my phone, 11:58. I was 2 minutes early, which is a habit I have that has never once been rewarded. Then the kiosk door opened and Jeff Henry walked out. I want to be accurate about this because it matters. My first thought, genuinely, was that something had happened to this man, not recently, like something had been happening to him for a long time, and it had finally gotten most of the way done. He was stocky, maybe 5'9", with gray hair pushed back from his forehead in a way that suggested he'd done it with his hand sometime last week and hadn't touched it since. His uniform was a supervisor's uniform. I could tell by the stripe on the sleeve, but it looked like he'd been sleeping in it. His eyes were pale gray and so bloodshot they looked almost pink in the orange light. There was a tremor in his hands. Not a small one. He had a cigarette going. He didn't offer to shake hands. He just looked at me through the window of my car and said, "Bryant." "Yeah," I said. He jerked his head toward the gate. "Park inside. Leave the car by the kiosk." That was the orientation. That was all of it. I parked, got out, grabbed my thermos. Henry was already walking toward the pier, cigarette trailing smoke over his shoulder. I followed him because what else do you do? The gate clanged shut behind me on a spring mechanism, and that sound kind of sat with me for a second. I kept walking. The pier was long. I'd looked it up on Google Maps before coming out, so I knew the general layout. Rows of shipping containers stacked 2 and 3 high along the sides. A concrete lane down the middle wide enough for forklifts. A series of dock lights that only covered about half the actual space. At night, it felt longer than it looked on a map. The Pacific was out there past the edge, just black water and the distant lights of other ships sitting at anchor. Henry walked me to the end of the pier and stopped. There was a container there, just one, sitting by itself at the far edge, away from the stacked rows, with maybe 30 feet of empty concrete around it on 3 sides and the harbor on the 4th. It was painted flat black, not the standard container color, not that dark navy that fades to gray, but a specific flat black that was hard to look at directly. The dock lights hit it and just sort of stopped, didn't bounce back the way they should. I noticed that, and then I noticed I'd noticed it, and I filed it under things to think about later. Henry reached into his jacket and pulled out two things. The first was a laminated card, maybe the size of an index card, with text on it in typewriter font. The second was a key. Iron, heavy, old. I mean genuinely old. The kind of old where you think about the fact that someone made this thing by hand a long time ago. It was on a plain metal ring, and it was cold in a way that went past the January air. He held them out. I took them. "The card's got 5 rules," he said. His voice was flat and rough, a smoker's voice. No warmth in it at all, but not mean either. Just empty. You follow them. That's the job. I looked at the card and then back at him. "What's the actual job, though? Like, what am I securing?" "You're keeping the tenant satisfied." He nodded toward the black container. I waited for more. There wasn't more. "The tenant," I said. "The quiet tenant. It's in the container. The rules tell you what it needs and when." He took a drag off the cigarette. "The key's for the padlock on the container. You'll know when to use it." I looked at the container again. No windows. No ventilation slats that I could see. Just flat black metal and a padlock the size of my fist on a hasp that looked like it had been welded directly into the door. How long has someone been doing this job?" "Long time," Henry said. "And the last person—" "The rules are clear," he said. He wasn't being evasive. He just sounded like a man who'd stopped engaging with certain questions because engaging with them didn't help anything. I looked down at the laminated card. The typewriter font was small but readable, 5 numbered lines. I didn't read them yet, not fully. Just caught a few words. Before 1 a.m. and do not look directly, and 3 times, no more. "This is a lot," I said. "I'm not great at saying things in the moment. That was the best I had." Henry dropped his cigarette and stepped on it. He looked at me for the first time like he was actually looking at me, not just at a new employee standing in a slot. "You got a reason you need this job," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." He nodded once, like that explained everything, and maybe it did. "Follow the rules, all 5, every time." He turned and started walking back toward the kiosk. "Wait." I took a step after him. "What happens if I don't?" He didn't stop walking. "Read the card." I stood there and watched him go. His footsteps were loud on the concrete, and then they weren't. I heard a truck door, an engine, tires on the gate's gravel apron, then nothing but the water. The Pacific moved against the pilings below the pier. Slow, steady, cold. I was alone at the far end of Pier J with an iron key in one hand, a laminated card in the other, and a container full of something someone had decided to call the quiet tenant. I looked at the card. I started reading. The rules were printed in Courier New. I remember that specifically because my mom had an old typewriter she kept on a shelf in the living room when I was a kid, purely decorative, and the font on the card matched it exactly. Someone had typed these rules on an actual typewriter or gone out of their way to make them look like they had. I wasn't sure which was weirder. There were 5 of them. Rule 1. Fill the silver bowl with harbor water at 1 a.m. Exactly. Not tap water. Not bottled. Harbor water, drawn from the pier's east ladder, poured in full before 1:05 a.m. Rule 2. If you hear clanging from the black container between 1:30 and 2 a.m., approach and knock 3 times. Flat palm, not knuckles. Wait for silence before stepping back. Rule 3. Between 2 and 3 a.m., do not approach the railing on the harbor side. Do not look at the water. Do not respond to any voice you hear coming from below the pier. Any voice. No exceptions. Rule 4. If the key grows hot, go to the container immediately. Unlock it, open both doors fully, and turn your back to the opening. Do not look inside. Wait until you hear the bowl go quiet, then close and lock the doors. Rule 5. Do not shine a direct light source at the black container after midnight. That was it. 5 rules. Laminated, the size of an index card, a small hole punched in the top left corner like it was meant to go on a key ring. The back was blank. I stood there on the pier reading it twice, maybe 3 times. The Pacific was doing its thing below me, that slow, rhythmic push against the pilings, and the overhead lights along the pier were buzzing the way old fluorescents do, that faint electrical tick that you stop hearing after a while. I read the rules a 4th time. My first thought, genuinely, was that Henry had done this to every new hire. Typed up a dramatic little card, handed over a prop key, pointed at a container, and called it something ominous, then drove off to watch from somewhere on a phone camera. I'd worked enough jobs where the existing crew liked to mess with the new guy. Warehouses, mostly. One parking structure where the overnight guys had convinced a new hire that the elevator on level 4 had a ghost, which turned out to be a motion-sensitive air freshener someone had zip-tied to the ceiling. Grown men. I don't know. This felt like that. It felt exactly like that. And I decided to treat it like that. And I folded the card and put it in my breast pocket and got to work. What I actually knew how to do was check a perimeter. That's the job. Strip down. You walk the boundary, you verify the locks, you log anything that looks off, you move on. I'd been doing versions of it for 6 years, across 3 different companies. I wasn't fast at it, but I was thorough, which matters more on a quiet pier at midnight than speed does. Pier J was long. Longer than it looked from the gate. The main spine of it ran maybe 400 feet out over the water, with container stacks on both sides and a narrow service lane down the middle. Most of the containers were standard. Maersk, Costco, a few MSC boxes with the logo faded down to almost nothing. They were locked with standard ISO padlocks, the kind you can get at any hardware store, and I checked about 40 of them in the first pass. All sealed. No signs of tampering. The concrete was stained with old oil and salt residue, and in a couple spots someone had spray-painted numbers that probably meant something to the longshoremen who worked the day shift. I wrote nothing in my log because there was nothing to write. The black container was at the far end. I'd already seen it with Henry, but I walked past it again during my perimeter check and gave it a wide berth without really deciding to. It was just what my feet did. The thing sat on a concrete pad that was slightly raised from the rest of the pier surface, like it had been poured specifically for that container, and nothing else. No shipping company logo, no container number stenciled on the side. Just that flat black paint that didn't catch the overhead lights the way the other containers did. I looked at it for maybe 3 seconds and kept walking. I got back to the kiosk around 12:30. There was a folding chair inside and a small space heater that worked, and someone had left a copy of a Sports Illustrated from 2 years ago on the floor, which I read most of. I'm not a big sports person, but it was something to do. I checked my phone. I had a text from my sister asking if I'd started the new job. I typed back, yeah, going fine, which was technically accurate. I thought about texting my wife, but it was past midnight and she'd be asleep. And anyway, what would I say? Hey, my supervisor handed me a haunted index card and drove away. That's not a text you send. I put my phone away and watched the clock on my phone hit 1 a.m. I got up. The east ladder was a metal access ladder bolted to the side of the pier about halfway down, the kind they use for emergency water access. There was a bucket on a hook next to it, orange plastic, the kind you'd find at a Home Depot. It had a rope tied through the handle. Someone had left it there on purpose. I dropped it over the side and felt it hit the water and pulled it back up, and it came up full and cold and smelling like salt and diesel and something else I couldn't name. That harbor smell. It's not clean ocean smell. It's working water smell, which is different. I carried the bucket to the black container. The silver bowl was there, bolted directly to the concrete pad on a short steel post, like a bird bath with ambitions. It was real silver, or at least silver-colored, and it was bigger than I'd expected. Maybe 14 inches across, shallow, with a slight lip around the edge. It was bone dry. I looked at it for a second, looked at the bucket, looked at the container. I poured the water in. The purple happened instantly. Not gradually, not slowly. Instantly, the moment the harbor water touched the silver, the whole surface went this deep bruised color, somewhere between eggplant and a bad contusion. And it steamed. Not a lot, just a thin curl of vapor rising off the surface, but the night air was maybe 55 degrees, and harbor water doesn't steam in 55-degree air. It just doesn't. I took 4 steps back, maybe 5. I stood there and looked at the purple water steaming in the silver bowl, and I thought, okay. So that's real. I don't know what I expected to feel in that moment. Terrified, maybe. Some kind of dramatic internal reckoning. What I actually felt was tired and a little stupid for having spent an hour convincing myself it was a prank, and also very aware that I was standing alone on a pier at 1 a.m. with no one to call. I pulled out the card and read Rule 2 again. If you hear clanging from the black container between 1:30 and 2 a.m., approach and knock 3 times. Flat palm, not knuckles. I walked back to the kiosk and sat down and watched the Sports Illustrated without reading it. At 1:45, the clanging started. It was slow, deliberate. 1 hit, then a pause, then another, then another. Metal on metal, coming from inside the container, evenly spaced like something counting out a rhythm. Not frantic, not desperate, patient. That was the part that got me. It was patient. I sat in the folding chair for probably 30 seconds longer than I should have. Then I stood up and walked back down the pier. My boots were loud on the concrete. I was aware of how loud they were. The clanging was still going when I got there. Same pace, same weight behind each hit. I stopped in front of the container doors and looked at the flat black surface, and raised my right hand and pressed my palm flat against the metal and knocked 3 times. The metal was cold, colder than the air, colder than the harbor water had been. The clanging stopped. What came after it was not silence. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't quiet. It was the opposite of quiet, actually, except there was no sound. Just this low frequency that I felt in my jaw, in the back of my molars, like when you're near a subwoofer that's turned up too high, and your whole skull starts to resonate. It wasn't painful. It was worse than painful. It was like my body was receiving a signal it wasn't built to receive, and it was doing its best with what it had. I stepped back from the container. The hum stayed with me, in my teeth, in the hinge of my jaw. I pressed my back molars together and felt it there. I walked back to the kiosk and sat down in the folding chair and put my hands on my knees and looked at the floor. The purple water was still steaming in the bowl outside. I could see it from where I sat if I leaned forward. I checked my phone. 1:52 a.m. 8 minutes until 2 o'clock. Until Rule 3. I sat there with the hum in my teeth and the harbor moving under the pier and the black container sitting at the far end of it. And I thought about Jacqueline. I do that. When things get bad, I think about her, which is either a coping mechanism or just the truest thing about me. I'm not sure. I thought about the physical therapy schedule on the fridge at home, the one with the color-coded blocks. I thought about what the envelope in Henry's truck might actually contain. The hum faded slowly, over maybe 10 minutes until it was gone. I kept sitting. I kept watching the pier. 2 a.m. was coming. The fog came in at 2:03. I know the exact time because I checked my phone right when I smelled it. That smell hit first. Rotting kelp and something metallic underneath it, like old pennies left in standing water. I'd been out on the pier doing a slow walk, just keeping my legs moving, and then the air just changed. One breath it was cold salt air, the next it was that. I stopped walking. The fog itself moved wrong. Normal harbor fog comes in gradual, soft, kind of lazy. This came in like it had somewhere to be. It swallowed the far end of the pier first, then rolled toward me in a low wall, maybe 4 feet high. And I watched it come, and I thought, okay. Rule 3 is at 2 a.m., and it's 2:03, and this is probably what Rule 3 is about. I put my phone away. I stood still. The fog settled around my knees and kept rising, slow, until it was chest height, and I was standing in it with my chin above the surface and the black container invisible somewhere at the other end of the pier. The dock lights turned into blurry orange smears. The harbor sounds went muffled. I could hear the water under the pier, but it sounded farther away than it should have, like the fog was eating the distance. Then I heard Ember. She was crying. Not a lot, not dramatic, just that particular sound she makes when she's really scared and trying not to be. I know that sound. I've heard it maybe 4 times in 12 years, and I know it the way I know my own name. It came from below the pier. From the water. I took 3 steps toward the railing before I even knew I was moving. My hand was reaching out for the railing post, and my foot was already lifting for the 4th step when something in my brain caught up with my legs, and I stopped. Just stopped. Stood there with 1 foot half raised like an idiot. The voice kept going. Ember, scared, somewhere in the black water under the pier, and my whole body wanted to go to the railing and look over and call back to her. Rule 3. Don't approach the water between 2 and 3 a.m., regardless of what you hear. Regardless of what you hear. I remember reading that and thinking, what a weird way to phrase it. Regardless. Like Henry had thought about all the different things a person might hear and decided the word regardless covered all of them. I understood it now. I understood exactly what he meant. I turned around and walked the other direction, back toward the kiosk, and the voice followed me. It moved with me, still below, still in the water, but tracking me down the length of the pier. Ember's voice, the real version of it, the exact pitch, and the exact way she breathes between words when she's crying. I kept walking. My jaw was tight enough to hurt. I got to the kiosk and I grabbed the railing on the landward side of it, the side facing the parking lot, facing away from the water. I wrapped both hands around the metal and I stood there and I closed my eyes. The voice was still going, still coming from behind me, from the water side, still her. I thought about the laminated card. I thought about the exact words. Don't approach the water. Don't look down. Don't respond. 3 separate instructions that all meant the same thing. It's not real. It's not her. Don't go. That helped a little. Not a lot, but a little. Then the footsteps started. Wet. Heavy. Concrete is loud when something's walking on it, and this was loud. Each step a flat, wet slap, and it was coming from the water side of the pier. I kept my eyes closed and my hands on the railing, and I listened to it come toward me. It moved slow, deliberate, not rushing. It circled around behind me, around the kiosk, and I tracked it by sound. Behind me, then my left, then in front of me, then my right, then behind me again. Just circling. The smell got worse every time it came close. Kelp and copper and something else under that. Something I don't have a word for. Something old. Ember's voice kept going the whole time. I stood there for probably 40 minutes like that, eyes shut, hands on the railing, listening to the thing walk circles around me, and the voice coming from the water, and the fog pressing in on everything. I'm not going to say I was calm. I wasn't. My hands were shaking enough that I could feel the railing vibrate. But I didn't move. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't call back. I thought about Jacqueline. I thought about the color-coded therapy schedule on the fridge. I thought about the way she looked at me when I left for this shift, half asleep in the doorway, hair messy, telling me to drive safe. I thought about the medical bill on the kitchen counter from the last round of PT, the number in the bottom right corner, and I thought about Henry's envelope, and I stood there, and I held on. The harbor clock struck 3. 1, 2, 3. Loud and flat across the water. The footsteps stopped. The voice stopped. The fog started pulling back, slow, the same way it came in. I stood there for another full minute before I opened my eyes. The pier was dry. Not damp. Dry. Like nothing had been on it at all. I looked down at my boots. The left one looked fine. The right one looked fine. Then I looked at my left boot again, and I saw the line. Clean across the outside of the ankle, about an inch wide. The leather was just gone. Not torn, not scraped. Gone. The material ended and then started again, and in between there was nothing, just the inner lining exposed, pale and raw-looking. I crouched down and looked at it, touched the edge with my finger. Clean cut. No fraying. I thought about where the thing had been in its circle when I'd felt something cold press across my ankle. I'd felt it, and I'd thought, don't move. And I hadn't moved. I hadn't looked down. I just stood there and let whatever it was do whatever it was doing, and kept my eyes shut and my hands on the railing. The leather was gone. Just the leather. Not my sock, not my skin. I stood up and let out a breath, and it came out shaky. That was it. That was the whole thing. The leather was gone, and I was still standing, and the pier was dry, and the thing was somewhere else now, done with me for the moment, and I was still here. I was still here. I stood there in the quiet for a minute, just breathing, looking at the empty pier and the fog pulling back toward the water and the orange dock lights coming clear again. The harbor sounded normal. The black container was visible again at the far end, just a flat, dark shape in the dark. Then my left thigh started burning, not like heat from exertion burning, like something pressed against my leg through the fabric. I looked down and slapped my hand against my pants pocket and felt it through the canvas. The iron key. Hot enough that I yanked my hand back. Hot enough that I could smell the fabric starting to go. I grabbed the key through the fabric, wrapped my whole hand around it in my pocket and yanked it out. It burned my palm on the way. I didn't stop moving. I ran. Not a jog. Not a fast walk. I ran down the length of the pier toward the black container, boots loud on the concrete, the key in my fist getting hotter with every second. The dock lights were back, the orange ones, and they threw long shadows ahead of me. The container was at the far end. It looked the same as always, flat, black, like a rectangle someone had cut out of the world and left there. The padlock was screaming. That's the only word for it. It was making a sound, a high, thin sound like metal being stretched, and when I got close enough I could see it was vibrating, the whole body of it shaking against the hasp. I grabbed it with my free hand and it burned that hand too. I didn't let go. I jammed the iron key in and turned it hard and the lock fought me, the mechanism grinding, the screaming getting louder, and then something gave and the shackle popped and the sound stopped all at once. Dead quiet. I pulled the lock off and set it on the concrete. My hands were shaking a little. The key was still warm but cooling fast now, like whatever it had been doing was done. The doors. I had to open the doors. I got both handles and pulled them wide, both sides, as far as they'd go. The hinges were old and they moved slow and they groaned the whole way. Cold air came out immediately, not a breeze, a wall, like opening a freezer that had been running for 100 years. It hit my face and my eyes watered. I turned around. That was the rule. That was rule 4, or close to it. Don't look inside. Turn your back. I turned my back to the open doors and I stood there facing out toward the pier and the harbor beyond it, and I waited. I heard it come out. Not footsteps. Nothing that clean. More like pressure moving, like the air itself was getting pushed aside by something big moving through it. The cold deepened behind me. My breath went visible, little clouds in front of my face, and I was staring straight ahead at the orange dock lights and the dark water past the railing, and I was not turning around. I was absolutely not turning around. Something enormous moved past me on my left side. I don't know how else to say it. I felt it the way you feel a truck pass you on the highway when you're standing on the shoulder. That displacement, that sense of mass. Except there was no sound to match it. No footfall, no scrape, no breathing. Just the cold and the pressure. And then it was past me and moving toward the silver bowl. The bowl was maybe 15 feet ahead and to my left. I didn't look at it. I kept my eyes on the water. Then the lapping started. Rhythmic, heavy, wet. Like something drinking, but slower than any animal I'd ever heard. And deeper. Like the sound was coming from something much larger than its source. I counted in my head because I needed something to do with my brain. 1, 2, 3. The sound kept going. Steady, patient. Whatever it wasn't in a hurry. Then the groan. Low and slow and satisfied. It moved through my chest like a bass note through a subwoofer. Nothing human makes that sound. Nothing I've ever heard makes that sound. It came from somewhere in front of me, and it lasted maybe 4 seconds, and then it was just gone. And the pier was quiet again. And the air was still freezing cold. I kept counting. 10 minutes. That's what I'd figured from the rules. 10 minutes, then close the doors. I didn't have a timer running. I was just counting in my head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, the way you do when you're a kid playing hide and seek and you're trying to be honest about it. I was not being a kid. I was a 38-year-old man standing with his back to an open shipping container in the port of Long Beach at 3:30 in the morning, counting Mississippi in his head because something enormous had just slid out behind him and was drinking from a silver bowl. That's where I was at. I thought about Jacqueline, not in a dramatic way. She just showed up in my head the way she does, the way she has since the accident. Her face. The way she looked at me the last time I visited the rehab center, tired but still her, still cracking jokes about the physical therapist's playlist. She had opinions about music, strong ones, always had. I kept counting. Around the 8-minute mark, the cold started to ease. Gradual, the air warming back toward normal in small increments. I could feel it on my face first, then my hands. My breath stopped clouding. Whatever was out here was going back. I heard the pressure move again, behind me, past me, back toward the container. I waited until I couldn't feel the cold anymore. Waited another 30 seconds past that just to be sure. Then I turned around. The pier was empty. The doors were still open. The darkness inside the container was total, no depth to it. Just black. I grabbed both door handles and pulled them shut, fast, and the hinges groaned again on the way closed. I got the padlock back on the hasp and ran the key through it, and it clicked. 1 clean click, and that was it. Done. I stood there, with my hands on the cold metal of the doors, and just breathed for a second. The air was normal temperature now. Harbor temperature. Cool and damp and smelling like salt and diesel. My hands had stopped shaking. Mostly. The cut on my left palm from earlier in the night was throbbing a little under the makeshift wrap I'd done with my undershirt, but it wasn't bad. I'd done it. I'd opened the door and stood there and listened to something feed 10 feet behind me, and I'd locked it back in, and I was still standing. The rules had held. Whatever the rules were, whatever they were actually doing, they had held tonight. I was still thinking about that when the lights in the kiosk went out. All of them. At once. The orange dock lights, the fluorescents in the little booth at the pier entrance, the small light over the equipment locker. Everything. The pier went completely dark, and I mean dark. The kind of dark you don't get in the city. The kind where you put your hand in front of your face and get nothing back. I stood very still. The harbor was still there. I could hear it. Water against the pilings, the distant sound of a container ship somewhere out in the channel. Normal sounds. The pier itself was silent. I reached for my mag light. I clicked it on. The beam caught the black container dead center, and I knew the second it did that, I'd made a mistake. Not the kind of mistake where you think, okay, that was dumb, and you move on. The kind where your body figures it out before your brain does, and your stomach drops and your legs go loose. The surface moved, not like a trick of the light, not like the beam was playing off condensation or rust or anything that made sense. The flat black metal rippled, slow, outward from the point where the light hit it, like I'd dropped something into still water. Wave after wave moving out toward the edges and then folding back. And the whole time the container looked less like a container and more like something that was just barely holding a shape it had chosen. I killed the beam. Stood there in the dark with my heart going hard enough that I could feel it in my ears. The rippling didn't stop right away. I could still hear it. The metal, if it was still metal, making a low sound like a sheet being shaken out. Then quieter. Then nothing. I waited maybe 30 seconds, probably less. Then I turned the mag light back on because I had to see, and I pointed it at the ground instead of at the container. Let the bounce light reach it, and that's when I saw the eye. It had opened on the surface facing me. Pale, the way something is pale when it's never been in sunlight. That almost white color that's not quite any color at all. 5 feet across, easy, maybe more. The pupil was vertical, thin as a line at first, and then it flooded yellow. Not glowing, not lit from behind, just yellow, the way a thing is yellow. It found me. I don't know how else to say that. It wasn't scanning, wasn't moving around. It opened, and it was already looking at me. The container tilted, forward, toward me, just a few degrees, and the concrete underneath it made a sound I felt more than heard, a deep crack that ran up through the soles of my boots and into my ankles. The container was maybe 40 feet long, and however many tons that is, and it was leaning off the pier toward me like it weighed nothing. I understood what I'd done. The light had given it something, a direction, a point to push against. I didn't know the physics of it or the logic of it, but I understood it the way you understand a door is locked, just a fact. And the fact was that the beam had broken something that was supposed to keep the geometry of that box intact. I turned the mag light off and ran, not away from the container, toward the silver bowl. I don't know why I knew that was the move. The rules, maybe, the logic of the rules. The bowl had been the offering point all night, and it was the only thing I had that had worked. I sprinted across the concrete in the dark. No light, just counting steps and hoping I didn't go off the edge into the harbor. And I hit my knee on the bolted base of the bowl hard enough that I saw white and had to grab the rim to stay upright. Dry. The bowl was completely dry. Whatever had come out of the container at 3:30 had taken everything. I had my water bottle, half full, maybe a little less, warm from being in my jacket pocket all night. I upended it into the bowl. The water hit the silver and just sat there. Flat. Nothing. No purple. No steam. Nothing. It was just water in a bowl, and whatever that meant it wasn't enough. The concrete cracked again behind me, louder this time. I didn't look back. I don't know how I didn't look back, but I didn't. I had my pocket knife on my right hip, the small one I'd carried since I worked a parking garage in Inglewood, and learned that being completely unarmed in an empty structure at 2 a.m. was a choice I didn't want to keep making. I got it open. 3-inch blade. Nothing impressive. I held my left hand over the bowl and I made a cut across the palm, and it hurt more than I expected. A sharp, bright line of pain. And I held the cut over the water and let it run. It wasn't a lot. A thin stream of it, dark in the dark, dripping down into the water in the bowl. I pressed the edges of the cut together, let it pool, let it drip. I kept my eyes on the bowl because looking at the container wasn't going to help anything. The yellow light behind me went out. I felt it go more than saw it. The quality of the dark changed. The way a room changes when you turn off a lamp even if you're not facing it. Then the metal sound, that low, shaking sheet sound, went still. then nothing for a second. Then the container came down. The thud went through the whole pier. I felt it in my knees, in my jaw, in the fillings in my back teeth. A concussive drop, all that weight settling back onto the concrete, and then silence so complete I could hear my own blood hitting the silver bowl. I stood there, hand over the bowl, not moving. After a while, I straightened up and wrapped my hand with a strip I tore from the hem of my undershirt, which was already a mess from earlier in the night anyway. I tied it tight and held my fist closed and looked at the container. Flat black, smooth, nothing on the surface. No eye, no ripple, no lean. Just a container sitting at the edge of a pier the way containers do. I sat down on the concrete, right there next to the bowl. The cold came up through my jeans immediately, and I didn't move anyway. My back was to the harbor. I was facing the container, and I kept my eyes on it, and I didn't use the mag light again. My hand throbbed. The knee I'd hit on the bowl base was going to be purple by morning. I was cold and tired, and I smelled like salt and rust and whatever the harbor smells like at 4 a.m, which is not good. I sat there, and I watched the container, and I thought about Jacqueline. Her PT appointments were Tuesdays and Thursdays. The place was in Torrance, a 40-minute drive from our apartment, and she'd been going for 6 months, and the progress was real. The doctor had said so, the therapist had said so, and the bills were also real, and they were stacked on the kitchen counter in a pile I'd stopped opening because opening them didn't change the number. This was the number. Whatever was in that envelope Henry had mentioned. This was how the number got smaller. I kept watching the container. The sky above the harbor started changing somewhere around 6. Not suddenly, just gradually less dark, the black going to a deep gray, and then to the flat gray that comes before actual light. The container ship I'd been hearing out in the channel all night moved somewhere I couldn't see it anymore. A bird landed on a piling about 20 feet from me, looked at me, left. By the time the sun actually came up, I could see the crack in the concrete where the container had shifted. It ran maybe 4 feet, jagged, an inch wide at the widest point. The container sat right at the edge of it, perfectly still. I stayed where I was, hand pressed against my shirt, watching the pier go from gray to pale yellow as the light came in off the water. That was it. That was the night. Henry's truck pulled in at 7 on the dot. I heard it before I saw it. That same diesel rattle from the night before, coming around the far end of the lot. I was still sitting on the concrete near the kiosk, my back against the wall, my cut hand wrapped in a strip of my undershirt I'd torn off around 5. The strip had gone dark in the middle, not soaked through, just dark. It had stopped hurting somewhere around 6 and started itching instead, which I figured was probably fine. I didn't get up right away. I watched the truck park, watched Henry get out slow, the way a man gets out of a car when his knees have opinions about it. He had a cigarette already going. He stood by the truck door for a second and looked out at the pier the way you look at weather, just taking stock of it, not reacting to what he saw. Then he walked toward me. He didn't walk fast. He didn't look alarmed. He looked exactly the same as he had the night before, which was hollowed out and tired, and somewhere past the point of being surprised by anything. His uniform was still rumpled. Might have been the same cigarette even. I don't know. He stopped about 6 feet from me and looked at my hand. Then he looked at the silver bowl, which was empty and dry, sitting in its bolted bracket outside the black container like nothing had ever been in it. Then he looked at the crack in the concrete. 4 feet of jagged concrete, an inch wide, running right under the container's edge. He nodded once. That was it. Just the one nod. The nod of a man who'd seen the math and recognized the answer without needing to work through it himself. He didn't ask what happened. Didn't ask about the crack or the bowl or the strip of undershirt around my palm. Didn't ask if I was okay, which honestly I respected. I wasn't okay, and we both knew it, and there was no version of that conversation that would have helped either of us. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Thick, letter-sized, manila, the flap just folded over, not sealed. He held it out. I stood up. My legs were stiff and my back made a sound I didn't love. I took the envelope. It was heavy in a specific way. Paper money has a particular weight to it when there's enough of it. I'd felt that weight maybe twice in my life before, both times at a bank, both times for things like down payments. I opened the flap and looked inside. The bills were hundreds, banded. I didn't count them right there, but I could see enough to know it was a lot more than whatever hourly rate we'd talked about on the phone 2 weeks ago. A lot more. I closed the flap. "That's 5,000, Henry said. His voice was the same gravel and ash tone as before. Flat. No ceremony to it. Could have been telling me the weather. I looked at him. I didn't say anything because I didn't have anything ready. "Tenant took a liking to the offering," he said. He tapped ash off his cigarette. The blood. It responded to that. I thought about the eye. The way the rippling went still when I put my hand over the bowl. I didn't want to think about it. But there it was. "It'll expect you back tonight," Henry said. I looked down at the envelope in my hand. Then I looked out at the pier. The container was sitting exactly where it always sat, flat black surface, perfectly still in the morning light. The crack in the concrete ran up to its base and stopped there. The bird was back on the piling. Different bird, maybe. Hard to say. Same rules, Henry said. Card still good. I still had the laminated card. It was in my jacket pocket. I'd been carrying it all night like a grocery list for staying alive, which is more or less what it was. Henry took a long drag and looked out at the water. The harbor was doing normal harbor things. A container ship moving slow in the channel, a couple of gulls, the flat gray chop of the Pacific doing its thing. It looked completely ordinary. That was the part that got me a little, honestly. How ordinary it all looked at 7 in the morning. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked him. He didn't answer right away. Finished his drag. Let the smoke out slow. "Long enough," he said. That was it. That was the whole answer. I didn't push it because the look on his face when he said it wasn't a closed-off look. It was an empty one, like the question had a number attached to it and the number had worn him down to where he didn't want to say it out loud anymore. I got that. He dropped the cigarette and stepped on it. Looked at my hand one more time. "You should clean that properly," he said. "Infection's a real thing." "Yeah," I said. He walked back to his truck. No handshake. No see you tonight. He just got in, started it up, and pulled out of the lot the same way he came in, diesel rattle fading, then gone. I stood there in the morning light, holding the envelope. I thought about Jacqueline. Not in a dramatic way, just the way she comes into my head when I'm making a decision I already know the answer to. Like she's the tiebreaker, except she's always the tiebreaker, so it's not really a tie. I thought about the stack of envelopes on the kitchen counter at home, the ones from the therapy center and the specialist and the place that makes her chair. The ones I'd stopped opening because the numbers inside them didn't change just because I looked at them. $5,000 in one night. I did the math without meaning to. Couldn't help it. I'm not good at a lot of things, but I know how to look at a number and figure out what it covers. This covered 2 months of the therapy sessions. More than 2 months, actually. This was the difference between the specialist calling us back and not calling us back. Jacqueline had been doing this thing lately where she'd squeeze my hand twice when she wanted me to know she was okay. 2 quick squeezes. She started doing it after the accident, I think, because she could see I was scared and she was trying to tell me not to be. She's 9. She was reassuring me. That's her. I put the envelope in my jacket pocket, next to the laminated card. The walk to my car was maybe 200 feet. I took it slow. My boots were loud on the concrete and I could hear the water under the pier. The usual slap and pull of it against the pilings. Normal sounds. The sun was fully up now and the light was coming in clean off the water, the kind of flat white morning light you get in Long Beach when the marine layer hasn't rolled in yet. I got to my car, a 2009 Civic, gray, one hubcap missing on the passenger side rear. I'd been meaning to replace it for about a year. I unlocked it and opened the door and stood there for a second with my hand on the roof. I already knew I was coming back. I'd known it before Henry handed me the envelope, if I'm being straight about it. Maybe I'd known it since I filled that silver bowl at 1 a.m. and watched the water turn purple. You do a thing like that, and you're already in it. The envelope just made the math clean. I got in, closed the door. The car smelled like fast food wrappers and the pine air freshener Jacqueline had picked out at the gas station 2 months ago, the little tree kind. She'd been very serious about the color. Green, she said, not the blue one. I started the car and pulled out of the lot. At the exit, I checked the mirror out of habit. The pier was behind me, the container at its far edge, sitting in the morning light. Black and flat and still. The crack in the concrete wasn't visible from this distance. From here, it just looked like a container. The kind you see stacked on every dock in the harbor, hundreds of them, nothing special. I knew better now. I pulled onto the access road and headed toward the freeway. The envelope was in my pocket. The laminated card was in my pocket. My hand itched under the makeshift bandage, and I needed coffee and a real bandage and probably about 10 hours of sleep in that order. I had until nightfall. I merged onto the 710 and let the morning traffic carry me home.